It's all right, General. People have started measuring themselves. This sector of the war, the American sector, look at the map on the wall. It's we've made great progress. The army over here, people have started measuring themselves, which saves us the task of doing it for them, and it makes our life much easier because you can tell they betray themselves by the look of guilt on their face. They're immediately arrested and lined up, cordoned off, grouped, and shot. Some are saved, a few, because we need to number a few and use them as well, I suppose I'm not supposed to say it out loud, but as they're categorised as slaves. And, well, the American sector is doing very well. It's come across from the East Coast to almost to the West Coast, went through Kansas, Denver, Colorado, all those states years ago. But in the European sector, we're having some trouble. Armies have combed from Russia, from the east coast there, the Pacific coast, and met in the middle in Germany from the west coast, combed across, and we've arrested them, used the same criterion again. As I say, most of the population knows it's guilty, and they've admitted it to themselves long ago, that they have the measurements, or they don't have the measurements. It matters neither way. If they do have the measurements, they're guilty of murder because they've murdered they've murdered their soul, their originality. But if they don't have if they don't have the murderous measurements, then they're guilty of treason because they've betrayed the state, which has employed the criterion to ferret them out. It's a little complicated, and I'll disentangle it for you later. So don't worry about it. Just carry on shooting, General. Carry on shooting. We're filming, by the way. We were going to cast Liz Fraser and Kenneth Williams in the lead parts, but we've had trouble locating the resurrection in that instance, but we'll find them, and we'll cajole them or ask them or request them or get them to do their duty and make a sacrifice. And what's that, General? What's that, General? I beg your pardon? They've already done that. They've already made their sacrifice. They've already made their sacrifice! They've already made their sacrifice! They've already made their sacrifice! Oh, for crying out loud, shut up! Sounding like a repetitive machine. I know this whole war has been a sacrifice for the machines, but still, that's the way it is now. I mean, when you've got a DNA machine that dictates what we think, and the human spirit's observations mean nothing and are excluded and no longer evidence in law in a court, and the reading of the machine is taken as if swearing on oath in the witness box a gospel. I mean, that's what we fought for. I saw a lawyer once try and tell me that the machine could only produce a reading or a result which was entirely dependent on the information fed into it. And obviously, if the information fed in was a fraud, the result would be, etc., 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 etc. But the judge naturally threw it out of the argument out of court. I think that fellow was eventually made to retire for some time and enter into a sanctuary and recant, and he was retrained, and he may be practicing again, a good passive young man, a barrister who simply mouths the rules and parrots, and is given ticks and marks, 10 out of 10, of course, paid well, and paid by the state now. All barristers are paid by the state, yes. No criminal bar any longer, simply a tribunal-like situation. And, well, of course, because aggressive, adversarial behaviour was too aggressive. Can't have that now. It's all submissive argument. I wouldn't call it argument. I wouldn't call it argument, General. Of course not. Well, you yourself are doing very well, General, so that's it. Well, I'll report back to the Minister. I think all's going well in the American sector, the European sector. The Pacific sector fell, yes, Japan years ago, Australia, New Zealand, Argentina, I see. Antarctica, all under the umbrella, the veil of the companies and corporations that we brought in and entered. Shareholders of the prime ministers of various countries and sectors. There's about half a dozen now. We sliced it up, sectioned off the world. We took criterion from Spain and Portugal of the 12th, 15th century, 12th century. So many years ago, the calendar's been abolished. We've got a different calendar of mind now. It's been inculcated into pupils and into the child. Everything's changed now, and it's much better. Change is good. Change is wonderful. And God, thank God we got rid of God. People had an incredible ability to find an inner faith of strength from their God, no matter what religion. All had it, and it's been, thank God, excuse my words, General, banished. Yes, the triumvirate, the circular triumvirate is made of six. The numbers matter for nothing now. Words, surface, descriptions, simply descriptive sounds that we utter out of our mouth, and the actuality, the actual reality, what happens physically bears no resemblance, and no resemblance to how things are described now, so that in any court of law one can simply describe something, or in politics or in political context, anything can be described as anything. You can call anything you want, and it's got no relation to reality. But that's the trial. The game, of course, is that things are tried in the abstract, just words, and the words can be shuffled around and used as anything. The dictionary no longer applies, you see. The word no longer matches the meaning that was ascribed to it in years past. And goodness gracious me, for example, in the physical situation, if I described you and your platoon of soldiers over there shooting that man, those men and women down, those children in cold blood, like that, well, there'd be hell to pay. Well, not really. You would have to sort of apologise and say you're sorry for a little, look contrite and, rub your hands on television, and then we'll reinstate you and get on with it. But the thing is that it doesn't matter in any case, because it's shooting down those men, women and children is not described as heinous or heinous. It used to be in other jurisdictions and language, but in this one it's now called an accident and a mistake. It's something that you misspoke about when you gave the order. You wouldn't do it again. Now, you just put out a blanket statement universally explaining that in that context, and that's it. Bob's your uncle. I must get rid of that description in this particular new society, this new age we're having. I can't... Robert your uncle. We'll call it that from now on. It doesn't matter anyway. But anyway, the Civil War, carry on. International Civil War. It's marvellous, really. I am the designer, the builder came in, and they divided up the whole world in these sections, and now they're fighting each other because naturally they've been given to understand that each nationality is at loggerheads. But of course the army, presenting itself as heroes and saviours, can come in and round everybody up, cordon them off, drive them into the sea, drown them and execute them in other ways. It's very simple. We used to try to use the guillotine. It was supposed to not be harmful, but of course then we saw a gentleman who was executed blinking at us with his right eye, and he smiled, so we couldn't go through that again. We're humane, merciful. Mercy dictates the way we operate, and that's all there is to it. That's the formula, that's the policy. So, General, carry on, old boy. Carry on, won't you? I'm going to have a cup of coffee. Carry on, old boy. Her threadbare dress, with holes guttered, as she was carted behind the carriage. I'd seen her, 1780, 1789, 1793, Auschwitz. Plastered was her garish hair with red, rusty auburn rouge, and her cheeks were marked with scarlet, as if representing the murder blood of Ravensbrück. God, thighs, split dress stockings, wrists roped together brutally. She was glaring at the bar in chains, black and white. Jewellery wearing the brooch of St. Magdalene, the nun, ruby at her throat and navel. And I noticed there was a tributary. It linked the navel to the voice box of the throat, went through the canyon, the area between her breasts. It was marked on a map. The map was up on the wall like an X-ray. When I came in, I found it. I'd come up through the tunnel, up the trapdoor, into this house, and I walked in, and then I saw him. He was lying against the wall, naked, dead. And up on the wall was this X-ray chart, and it had these maps, these marks, and the marks were words that had been used, the abstract. And because the dictionary's meanings had been muddled and messed around, I couldn't match. But when I saw the map and saw the words, for example, Mount Andes, marked near, just below the breast, I knew that, for example, those words were referred to a way to operate, to go up, to test the DNA inside each of their bodies behind the breast, because each was Anastasia, Antoinette, others who had been murdered. And I was sure my theory was right, no matter what the history books said. We were paying for what we'd done to them. The matricide, the Joan, and there against another wall was another X-ray chart of Joan of Arc. Similar marks. Heading on it said chakras, C-H-A-K-R-A-S, chakras. This professor-type man who lay dead on the floor, I could see a bloody scar on the side of his stomach. He must have been trying to investigate, to get in, to look into these archaeological women of history and see if he could understand what caused the DNA murder, the murders, because then maybe he thought he could save the world. And there was a diary. He'd been making a diary. I was a soldier in the army. I quickly grabbed the pages and I looked at them. I tried to just understand them, where they said that there was a corporation and it employed this idea of deception. There was a heading here: deception, credits and balances, debits and credits. So this was the accounting book for the corporation, the company. I see. But it had an opening preface, and it said, "The secret to success is to deceive." Well, that's nothing new in that, I thought. But it says here that corporations use a pretense. They describe or pretend something that you will get it's not a guarantee, but it's a possibility. You pay as the customer. I see. You pay as the customer, and then you don't receive, because in the back of the corporation's handbook it had written these applications for which the customer has paid a fee are blocked and are automatically rejected because they are not allowed to be let in. They are categories. So I saw what happens. So when I went through the pages, I flicked through them. It seemed that if certain people applied from certain categories and areas of, well, it had a list here under the title countries, they were automatically rejected. But they still paid their fee, and there was another note, a disclaimer, an exclusion clause. No person shall receive a refund of their fee. No person shall receive a refund of their fee. Oh, I see. So that's a kind of civil transaction. I thought that would be what would be called a tort. I mean, when the barrister I had known one, a couple before the war, before memory, and they'd told me that there was a claim against the Government Act which prevented a person from suing a person, but a person was defined in the Constitution, the Act. I see, and Section 21 under the Act, the Constitution, said that people from a certain category and a certain DNA inheritance had no rights. They were subject to Section 21. Section 19 said that every person had protection from discrimination or persecution. Every person in a category or country had protection from persecution. But Section 21 said that every other section in the Act, the Constitution, was, quote, subject to the other provisions in this Constitution, namely Part 2, in which was Section 21, unquote. Therefore, where it said notwithstanding anything in this Constitution, Section 21 will apply, it meant that Section 19 and any other section, the section protecting the individual, the person, was suspended, rejected, no longer of any force whatsoever. So there were no rights, because Section 21 provided that the government only had power to legislate, to administrate, to administer policy in favour of a certain category of people. They were described as Freelanders. It then said in the back of the book, the Constitution, under Section 156, that anyone whose ancestry was of a certain category was not a Freelander. Therefore, when the government exercised power under Section 21, it could only do so for Freelanders. So it could only make law for Freelanders. They had the rights. And anybody else in any other category in the country who was a non-Freelander, who was a non-Freelander, was left out. If his DNA, the testing... now I knew why the testing was being done. If the testing showed a grandfather or a great-grandfather, etc., etc., on either side, a wife or a husband, the children had non-Freelander blood, as defined in the Constitution, the government had no power in any way, in any case, under Section 21, to even represent them. Yet, there was further provision in the document which said that nobody could leave the island. Nobody could leave the continent, the United Corporations area. Nobody could leave. Therefore, everybody was stuck within. And therefore, those who had no rights, no representation, still paid taxes and supported the Freelanders. It further seemed, on closer examination of the documents set out and attached to this diary, that the non-Freelanders had been the ones with guile. They'd been the genius. They'd been the ones who'd been able to get ahead, cunning, work their way up the ladder. They had ability. They were genius, as I have said. That's what it said in this document. So, in other words, the genius had been harnessed by the Freelanders. The genius had no rights, but were working for the Freelanders. The government under Section 21. Their elite, their triumvirate, it said it here, their six. And the genius was defined by the DNA. And the DNA was that which was left out of the official description of the population, the people, under Section 156. So it seemed as if after years of rounding up this genius, and had they been put into the great grand jail, 1 to 10. There were notes in this diary, this document, which I was deciphering. They'd been put into the prison, in the cells, and made to work for this triumvirate, this six, and all others, the rest of the world, the population, the categories, the United Corporation, the European sector, the South Pacific sector. All these sections have been combed now and rounded up, categorized, murdered, and just a few handful had been kept as slaves. I heard somebody coming towards me. So somebody else was alive outside. Anyway, I knew that it wasn't too bad. I mean, I was a soldier with the army, and I chopped my way up through this tunnel to get here. I mean, as far as I was concerned, I thought that I was saving the country against the enemy. I mean, I was doing my duty. I joined this army as a constitutional right to defend this country and its values and everything for which previous generations had fought and died for. But now I was reading this document that seemed to say that there'd been a complete upheaval, a coup d'etat. There'd been some overthrow of previous government control. I remembered the provisional government. It said that everybody would stay alive and simply work and prop up, support the triumvirate world government. And yet, but now the whole world population was being wiped out. We'd been told that these people, these clothed hags, were the enemy, agents in disguise, that they were infiltrating. And yet it seems as if we, the infantry, we were combing the population through swamps and rivers that ran with dry. It was define and provide. Define and provide. I'd seen it on a horizontal piece of wood soaked with blood near a broken down cart. The wheels had fallen off and there was a woman in the cart in a threadbare dress, her arms stretched out and her finger pointed to the sun. This is an apparition, I knew. I wiped my brow. I'd been so exhausted. But I couldn't get away from the fact that there'd been a change, an interim government. Somebody had orchestrated a huge upheaval and brought in a chronic policy by which we were shooting the people. And it seemed to me that perhaps, finally, it was because the corporation had reached a point with its back to the wall, because the people who'd paid fees and internationally and applied for particular things and been deceived because it must have leaked out in the back of the book that defined and orchestrated the behaviour of constitutions and commercial dealings of governments and corporations with the public, had never had any intention whatever at all in the first place from the start, had never intended to provide the product. So people had bought nothing. They bought time. And when I looked at the documents, I saw that lots of court cases had been held. Systems had been clogged up for years. Barristers, solicitors, there's their names. So that was it. Business as usual. Casualties. This society was proclaimed as utopia. A utopia. A utopian dream. Final solution. And when I looked at the page that fell out of the diary, it was a poem. And it said, "The Isle of Zephyr." The Isle of Zephyr is a utopia that floats. And across the moat the citizens stand sentinel. It was at this isle that a gentle wind came to pass. It blew from the west and could be seen to be blessed, and played music to the capital, strummed from strings of the heart's pinnacle. It was not without a care that this island was created and made a home for people. So when you think of the quest, remember the Isle of Zephyr. That was mutilated. That was blessed. I can't stop. He was like a member of a symphony orchestra, an instrument trying to get ready to test before he started playing. December reversed back down to the village simultaneously to suck down the bedding of the building and into the dome instantaneously before returning. This is what I read in the accompanying notes to the X-ray diagrams on the walls and the windows. Others were nailed against the windows like Christ, arms outstretched, crucified. These notes accompanying. I'll read it again. It started in mid-sentence. To suck her down to the building, up through it to the dome. There was a sort of broken line that made itself up and way round the Christ picture, from round about the midway of the thigh up to the shoulders to the mind. So this was an indication. In chalk on the board were the words Northwest Passage. It's an old ancient legend of the Northwest Passage. Anyway, I quickly looked back at the notes. I needed to find out what had been going on in this room. This scientist's room. This professor. Sure, that's who he was, who had died. He's still propped up against the wall, Superintendent. General? Oh, God, you've come in. I hadn't noticed during the night. I lay in that bed over there, slept here, and you must have come up right up this winding staircase from the outside. I came up through the inner tunnel. Trapdoors over there. Mm-hmm. Hello, Superintendent. Well, good afternoon, old boy. General? Hello, fellow. Just still twirling your moustaches, General, I see, yes. Oh, carry on, old boy. We've managed to knock out this whole sector, and we're in charge, and martial law. We've taken over here. I'm installing a government. The army is installing a government. We're having an investigation into everything that's gone on here, an inquiry. I want it done immediately. I'm setting up somebody. How would you like the job, old boy? How would you know? What were you before the war? Do you remember? Got any memory, old boy? Got any memory? Nobody else has. Well, we've rounded up all of them and shot them. Right, you, what were you before the war? Well, before the war, well, I was a barrister, actually, and before that I was a solicitor, before that, and before that I was an archaeologist, and before that I was a physician, and before that I was a physicist, and before that I was you remember, General, I was an international circuit tennis player, and can't you remember before the war I was a toast of the European circuit, and you remember Pacific circuit? In fact, General, I think I even played you, didn't I? Don't slap me down, General. I know I would have let you lose, but I couldn't. I mean, well, losing's a big quest today. You see, if we can get in charge and in a position where we can grab this sort of trophy of losing, then then the government's got its role all pinned down, all figured out. Yes, but for goodness sakes, General, there's nobody left to administer. To administrate. There's nobody left. Yes, but General leaned forward. He twirled his moustaches. You hear those sirens out there, old boy? They're taking every single body to the morgue and the hospital to examine their DNA. And if it's good, if it works, you see that picture of Christ on the wall, that fucking fellow there prostrate with his thighs pulled apart and his arms outstretched and thrashed and flayed and interlaced. Those are the ones whose DNA we want, because those are the ones who are the leaders who had the strength to go on. They're the saints. We are after the saints' DNA, because when we've got it, they can do the work and we can forever play. They're the ones with the genius. We're the ones who've got to live off them. Oh, good God, General, that's a bit blunt. I was always self-reliant. Now and before the war. Yes, but old boy, you don't want to go on forever being like that. Wine, women and song, for goodness sakes. That defines society today. Get in charge of this court case system whereby we flog them on by suing them and getting our cut, and the product's already worked out. It's a job done. Well, we can't allow the surplus to influx and infiltrate. For goodness sakes, that would be justice, and we haven't got the space. We haven't got the room. That's why you're confined here to this tomb. I looked up at him and I was a little bit shocked, but I noticed he was addressing the body against the wall, the Professor DNA. I decided to call him Professor DNA. All right, that's his designate. Designate him. Quick, put him in his category. We've got a list of categories here. They used to be classified and went through a courtroom inquiry. A judge would define and provide a classification, put them in this or that category and assign them their vocation. But now we are slick, streamlined. We go straight to the heart, the jugular, and just put them in their slate. They're slotted. Now this professor here, he can be jollied up, you know. Men, they're outside the door, superintendent. Get them in, get them over here. Fix bayonets. I place them outside just as designates to guard, because for goodness sakes, builders at last are in, and they're coming up behind the army, the engineering corps and the architect. Quick, start constructing. Look, there you see, bang, bang, bang over on that wall. They're doing it now. Quick, get the bars erected around this wall. Every single building in this sector, is immediately converted into a barn-type bar-laden building rooms, which are the new skyscrapers, you see? And everybody is designated a little allotment to put in, use. But there's nobody left to put in them. There's just the triumvirate and this handful of... You fool, don't you understand? It's just the machines that are put in each room. It's just a simple 4x4 square machine, block, automaton, robot that's put in the rooms, because every single body that we've killed and murdered is converted into this cast iron machine and simply stuck into a room where it mouths and words. Mama! 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 Turn it off! God, for goodness sakes, what's holding up that? Well, it's a pair of her knickers. What? Where did you find that? Well, it's the machine over there that you brought in. The machine's been dressed up in this... You've jumped a mere hurdle. It talks of itself. Oh, your pellets are put to better use of your rifle. Good God, that's a sort of a bastardized female voice. What are you doing with that machine over there? Well, it's dressed up in panties and bra, you see. It's put into a machine, and each of my men, my soldiers, I've got to keep them, give them some spleen. I mean, for goodness sakes, they just bang away and jump on that machine over there and just pump it up and down, over and over and over, up and down again and again and again, and the machine goes, and they've had sex. It's a brothel. We've got to have... What you do is, God, you realise what the army's about, for goodness sakes. Oh, God, I've got to provide for the men, you know. I remembered the words, and floats a moat, and the citizens stand sentinel. So that's what they were doing outside these entrances, these walls. The machine sparked again. I'd like to unlock the gates that flow milk from your nipples. She said. Good God, what the hell is this all about, General? Talk to me like that, you downtrodden lowly soldier. That slap you around. I can tell you something now, General. Your days are over. We're taking over. What makes you think that you've got the qualifications to do that? Because, General, of the measurements, the criterion. I fit the criterion. Everybody who has the measurements is not guilty of murder. You follow, General? You're guilty of murder. You don't have the measurements. Oh, what are you talking about, old boy? I've managed to ferret out everybody and clean up all these sectors. The American sector, the European sector, we're united now. We've all come together. The Pacific sector sagged and lagged and caved in long ago. The water of the whole of the Pacific has just simply turned inward and funneled down and gurgled and drowned everyone in that island sector down there. So what are you talking about? I've got the measurements. You're obsolete, General. The measurements have been tarted up. Your measurements have been superseded. They're obsolete. You see, the DNA, the criterion, the old way for measuring has been declared obsolete. It's a declaration. The declaration has been made by the court. They've confirmed that there were nobody took account of the extra considerations, the area of the so-called terrain of the junk, it used to be called, the contaminated areas. They've thrown it away, and it's got the answer to the DNA under section 156. You see, everybody who has got the measurements, who's got the right DNA, hasn't even been measured properly, because they didn't have the right equipment or the right criteria or the right procedures or the right intelligence of what had significance to apply the correct test to get the result. They've left out all the relevant information. So the courts declared that the decision makers internationally in every sector had no power, because under the statute you can only exercise the power if you have the conglomerate information that represents the whole picture, and the picture has been based on just a half-hearted, doubled up, tiny little bit of DNA which altered and skewed the basis from which they were trying to draw conclusions to conclude and work out which members of the population were genius and had the measurements. They've got the wrong ones. They've got all the ones who haven't got the measurements are running the show. They're mediocrity. They've only half-heartedly put in the information into the computer that gives the result. They've left out half of the information. So the decision's null and void. The judge, he declared that nobody can exercise power if they exercise it wrongly, because you are not given power by, he used the word God, under the statute, the Holy Order, to exercise it wrongly. So there's never been any exercise of power in the first place, no. The power, it's never even been exercised. So that's why there was a blackout. The power was never even exercised. Everything, all the decisions are ultra-virus. You've rounded up and executed all the wrong ones. Happy, General?